coaster season is right around the corner, so I decided to kick off the 2021 season by counting down every coaster I've ridden. I've been on 92 different coasters and plan to reach my 100th at Six Flags St. Louis in June. This is just my opinion, and this video will move quickly because of how many rides there are. So with all of that said, I present to you one of my biggest videos yet, every roller coaster I've ridden, ranked. '92 Dragon Wagon. I rode this at my local fairground and it just didn't feel safe. It was by far the jerkiest coaster I've been on, and it felt like it would fall apart at any minute. It's also very small for a kiddie coaster. In fact, I'm probably taller than this ride. It was boring and jerky, so it places last on this list. '92 Little Dipper. This is my first roller coaster. The oldest coaster in Ohio is located at Memphis Kiddie Park in Cleveland, and it isn't anything special. It is pretty scenic with some trees here and there, but even for a kiddie coaster, this ride is small. It's tame and a bit jerky, so I can't place it higher than this. '90 Great Pumpkin Coaster. This Kings Island coaster is one of the tamest kiddie coasters in the world. It's smooth, but very tame, boring, and short. '89 Coco Cruiser. This is basically the same thing as the previous, but this time the ride has a sharp helix, but it is more rough. I think it is a bit more fun than Great Pumpkin Coaster, but nothing more. '88 T3. I have nightmares about this coaster. This is my first and only SLC, which might change later this year, and I can't wait. T3, instead of giving you a concussion, almost cuts your legs off. It was jerky and very painful, and I couldn't even walk afterwards. This was definitely the most painful coaster I've been on. '87 Kitty Hawk. This is like a smaller version of an SLC, and sometimes bigger isn't always better. Kitty Hawk is one of the roughest coasters I've been on, and it is very tame. It rattles riders around the boring layout, but it is still better than the abomination that is T3. '86 Wilderness Run. The first kiddie coaster that really isn't jerky. Unfortunately, this old Cedar Point Intamin is very small even for a kiddie coaster, but it's smooth and has some nice scenery. It has 2 laps as well, making it lengthier than other kiddie coasters. '85 Wildcat. This was my last new credit of the year, and I walked away very disappointed. The layout isn't that bad, as it has some good dips and turns. It's just that this is the roughest coaster in the entire state. Every dip has a bad rattle, and everything jerks riders around. The middle has one of the biggest headache-inducing jolts on any coaster. '84 Woodstock Express. This Carowinds kiddie coaster was disappointing compared to the other Woodstock clones. It has the same layout, but for some reason this one is way jerkier than all of the others. There were lots of jolts near the end, and it made this ride to be one of the worst in the park. '83 Cedar Creek Vine Ride. The layout of this mine train coaster isn't the worst. Yeah, it's tame, but it has a nice setting over the water and some fast helixes to spice it up. But this is one of the jerkiest coasters I've ridden. Every turn provides jolts that are too uncomfortable to enjoy the coaster. '82 Flying Ace Aerial Chase. This is a clone of Kitty Hawk. This time it has better restraints. While it has the same layout, it has the better restraints on the Kings Island clone, making this one somewhat rideable. It's still boring, but a lot smoother than its twin. '81 Woodstock Express. This is the unique clone at Cedar Point. While it has some nice bends, it can be a bit jerky, and it isn't the most of thrilling coasters. I remember crying when I was younger because of how rough this ride was for me. If a kiddie coaster does that, it probably isn't too great. '80 Mean Streak, the first defunct coaster on the list. I agree with everything everyone had to say about this ride. It is by far one of the most boring coasters I've ridden. It's tall, fast, and way too long. Nothing happens in this layout. Also, this ride is very rough, which makes it impossible to enjoy the size of the ride. I'm glad Cedar Point replaced this ride. '79 Carolina Cyclone. By far the roughest aero looper I've ridden. The layout for Carolina Cyclone really isn't that bad. It has 2 relatively forceful loops and a fast helix near the end. But all of those elements, especially the middle corkscrews, are as rough as they could possibly be. The transition going into the corkscrews is even worse, with its weird airtime pop and sharp turn. I have no desire to ride this abomination again. '78 Hurler. Another Carowinds coaster places next, and this time it's a Woody. The first part of the coaster isn't even that bad. The drop is fun and the turn is very forceful. And then there is the rest of the coaster. The rest of the layout is slow, forceless, and worst of all, very rough. It isn't headache-inducing, but boring and jerky enough to be unrideable. 77, Woodstock Express. This ride and the next coaster are interchangeable, but the only reason I chose this to go below is because I found this one to be weaker with forces. This clone at Kings Island is smooth and fun, just not very intense. 76, Woodstock Express. Here comes the King's Dominion clone, and I find this one to be more forceful. Unfortunately, I only rode 4 coasters at King's Dominion due to the heat. This kiddie coaster was one of those 4. This ride is smooth and has a little airtime pop near the end. I also like the colors on this one more than the previous. 75, Wild Mouse. The first Dorney coaster is this orange Wild Mouse coaster. This is my second Wild Mouse coaster, and the inferior one in my opinion. It is a lot jerkier than the Carowinds clone, and it is too uncomfortable to enjoy the lateral filled experience. It's still more enjoyable than all of the previous coasters though. 74, Flight of Fear. Before you go and leave a dislike, let me explain. Flight of Fear, I have only ridden once, and that one time was not a great experience. I found this ride to be less intense than everyone says it is. Also, it was pretty jerky and the mid-course was very uncomfortable in the tight trains. I hope to give this ride another chance because I somewhat enjoyed the inversions in the dark. 73, Ricochet. This is the other Wild Mouse I've ridden, this time at Carowinds. While there isn't that much different between the two, I always found this one to be smoother, which causes a more enjoyable ride experience. 72, Gemini, the Blue Side. I've never been a big fan of Gemini. I always found it to be jerky and boring with its slow turns. 71, Gemini, Red Side. This is the other side of Gemini, which I find to be smoother near the end. It's still boring and jerky though. 70, Trailblazer. This is one of the smallest mine trains in the world, but it is still some fun. It is very short and has some jerks, but the small hills and scenery make up for it. It's not the best, but also not the worst. 69, Corkscrew. I always found this ride to be jerky, but then I rode it again and something changed. Now I find this ride to be pretty fun. It is still rough near the corkscrews, but it has some intense moments that bring it up on this list. 68, Carolina Gold Rusher. This mine train is pretty fun. It has some nice scenery over the lake in the park, and it has some nice turns. It's unfortunately very slow and boring in some parts, but it is very smooth. Also, the finale is nice with the dive through the tunnel. 67, Vortex. This is a defunct Kings Island looping coaster. It wasn't the smoothest of rides, but definitely a forceful one. It was full of laterals and positives. While the roughness did push it down for me, this is still a coaster I wish I rode more than once. 66, Racer. This Kennywood Woody is very smooth. In fact, this might be one of the smoothest wooden coasters I've ever ridden. However, this ride can be a bit boring. It has a bit of airtime here and there, but some turns can be a bit slow. It is still a fun coaster though. 65, Adventure Express. This mine train is the best one I've ridden. It has the best scenery around a mine train and it uses the terrain very well. It's also pretty quick and has some good laterals. Unfortunately, this is a very jerky coaster and can cause whiplash, but it has some fun moments. 64, Backlot Stunt Coaster. This coaster is surprisingly fun for being so small. Now, this coaster is pretty short and the trains are very tight, which can lead to some uncomfortable moments. But this ride has some intense moments and a dark tunnel which spices up the layout. Backlot Stunt Coaster is not a ride to be missed. 63, Iron Dragon. This suspended to Cedar Point coaster is a great one to start out on. It isn't too tall or fast, but it's very scenic. It's pretty smooth, but unfortunately it is very tame. Iron Dragon is fun, but not worth riding more than once. 62, Jackrabbit. This Kennywood classic is not too intense or smooth. It is definitely a rougher ride and some of the elements are very boring. So why does it place so high? This ride has one element that provides some crazy airtime. That element is the double down. Riders are launched out of their seat, which makes for this rough coaster to be one of the best in the park. 61, Sidewinder. This Hershey Park boomerang is actually quite enjoyable. It's an intense ride and the backwards aspect really increases the thrill. I found the restraints to be very tight, which killed the ride for me, but if you can get past that, it's pretty fun. 60, the Flying Cobras. This is the same thing with Sidewinder, the only difference being in the restraints. I found this one to be jerkier than Sidewinder, but Flying Cobras has less constricting restraints, so I enjoyed this ride a little more. These are interchangeable. 59, Thunderhawk. This Dorney Park wooden coaster is often hated on for no reason. The middle is a bit jerky, but everything else is pretty fun. The airtime is a bit lacking, but it still has some little pops here and there, and some great laterals. If you get past the roughness, it's a fun little ride. I will admit that trim at the end ruins the rest of the ride, though. 58, Invertigo. Not a lot of enthusiasts talk about this hidden gem of a coaster. Invertigo is often looked over, but it's very intense. Unfortunately, this coaster is pretty rough, but the forces more than make up for it. I try to get on this whippy coaster every time I go to Kings Island. 57, Super Duper Looper. This is the only coaster I forgot to put on my list originally, but it's actually pretty fun. It might be the smoothest looper I've ridden, and while it isn't the most forceful coaster, it has some great positives in the loop, and it's a very scenic ride. It isn't the most thrilling, it's just pure fun. 56, Blue Streak. This coaster is surprisingly fun. It can be a bit rough, but for an old wooden coaster, it is pretty smooth. Now, the ride experience is pretty great. The first half is full of great floater airtime, while the second half has no forces at all. The second half is boring, but the first half is superb. That's why I placed this so high up. 55, Thunderbolt. This is my favorite Woody at Kennywood. I went in with low expectations, but I came off very surprised. This coaster uses the terrain very well, and it has some great airtime and laterals. Unfortunately, I found this coaster to be very jerky, but the forces make up for it. 54, Comet. This Hershey Park wooden coaster is pretty slow, but that doesn't mean it isn't fun. It has some great airtime pops, especially near the end. And while it isn't very intense, it is pretty smooth for being the oldest ride in the park. 53, Fire Chaser Express. This is one of my favorite family coasters. I went in with low expectations and came off pretty surprised. This coaster is just pure fun. It's fairly smooth, and the launch and backwards launches are very thrilling. Also, it's built on a hill, making for great views. Unfortunately, the beginning is very tame, but overall, this ride is very fun. 52, Racer Red Side. For some reason, Racer at Kings Island is really good or really bad depending on which side you ride on. The bad side is the red side. Racer Red Side still has all of that great racer airtime, just less of it. Also, this side is a lot more painful than the other side, which is why it places very low. 51, Vortex. This stand-up at Carowinds really surprised me. It's fairly forceful for being so small, and it is very smooth. I was very surprised about how there wasn't any headbanging and the positives only hurt a little bit. This ride is unfortunately very small, which takes away from the experience, but everything else is pretty great. 50, Thunder Run. This Kentucky Kingdom wooden coaster was another underrated coaster for me. The drop is great, it's forceful, and it has some wonderful airtime pops. This is basically what Hurler should have been. The ending can be a bit bland, but overall this coaster is forceful and very smooth. 49, Nighthawk. Another underrated coaster. Most people say this ride is too painful, while it is actually the complete opposite. I found this ride to have zero head banging. It is the inferior Vekoma Flyer I've ridden because of the rattle and uncomfortable transitions near the end, but the setting and forces are pretty great. 48, the Raven. This wooden coaster is one of the roughest I've been on. Even if this coaster is painful, that doesn't mean it's a great ride in my opinion. This coaster is one of the most forceful in the park. The first half is full of great floater airtime, while the second half is full of crazy lateral Gs. It is one of the most thrilling but most painful wooden coaster experiences. 47, Laugh Track. I am riding 4 other spinning coasters this summer, but currently this is the only one I've experienced. A lot of people claim that this coaster is forceless, but I find it to be quite intense with the turns. The spinning adds a lot of thrill, and the theme in the dark adds to the experience. In my opinion, this is just a pure fun coaster. 46, the Bat. One of the most forceful suspended coasters. This is the most secluded coaster in the park, and that really adds to the experience. The ride sweeps around trees through very intense turns. Unfortunately, this thrilling ride is very short and a bit jerky, but the intensity and the swinging aspect makes up for that. 45, Wicked Twister. One of my favorite Cedar Point coasters. This ride is pretty jerky on the spikes, which can ruin your experience, but I find this coaster to have a lot more. It's very intense on each valley, and it's whippy on every twist in the spikes. The setting is wonderful, and the launch is an excellent gut punch. This ride is very short, but it is a big rush. 44, Hydra. This floorless coaster I found to have a bad rattle, but maybe that is just me. In my opinion, this is another pure fun coaster. The first half is full of intense and whippy inversions like the Cobra Roll, while the second half is just a nice time to put your hands up and enjoy the tame elements. 43, Tennessee Tornado. This is the only decent aero looper I've been on. The biggest flaw with this coaster is how short the ride is, but Tennessee Tornado is one of the most intense loopers I've ridden. Each element is massive, fast, and whippy, and each provides some great positives. 42, Magnum XL 200, the tallest and fastest aero on the list. I've never been the biggest fan of Magnum, as I found the last few hills to be too painful to enjoy, but it's not that bad of a coaster. The roughness adds to the chaotic experience, and this ride is massive, which really adds to the experience. I love how intense and crazy the airtime is as well. Magnum was ahead of its time, and it would be the #1 coaster at most amusement parks today. 41, Rougarou. This B&M floorless is always a fun time for me. It is easily forgettable among the other coasters at Cedar Point, but it's still a fun coaster. The only rough spots are in the pretty boring second half, but the first half is smooth and full of fast inversions, each of which provides some great positive Gs. Also, this ride has many great whippy transitions. 40, Steel Force. This Dorney Hyper is similar to Magnum in a way. It isn't as forceful, but a lot more enjoyable. The reason for that is because it is one of the smoothest coasters I've ridden. The floater airtime is great, and the helix is a great time to put your hands up and enjoy the great setting. The huge drops are always a fun thrill. 39. Racer Blue Side. Here's the other side of Racer at Kings Island, over 10 spots higher. I always found the blue side to be a lot smoother than the red side. Also, the airtime is a lot better on the blue side. The blue side is just a lot of fun and overall pretty forceful. 38. Steel Curtain. Don't hate on me for this spot, but I never found Steel Curtain to be that great. The inversions are fun and all, but there is only one airtime moment and no intense moments. It's unique and fun, just not very forceful. 37. Firehawk. And here's the other Vekoma flyer I've ridden. While the setting isn't as good on this defunct coaster, I found it to be a lot smoother, whippier, and overall just more enjoyable. This ride is also a bit longer and it has more comfortable elements. 36. Skyrocket. This Kennywood coaster is very underrated. I found this to be one of the speediest coasters in the state, and it's very intense, especially in the first half. It is whippy and full of nice pops of airtime, and that top hat is just incredible. The second half is lacking a bit, but it is still very fun. 35. Wild Eagle. This coaster is fairly tame, but it is still just a blast to be on top of a mountain. Wild Eagle is very fun and one of the smoothest coasters I've been on. It's full of hang time on each inversion and even has a bit of airtime on that drop. It isn't anything crazy, just pure fun. 34. Great Bear. This Hershey Park invert is one of the most intense coasters I've been on. A downside of this ride is how short it is and how it can have a bit of headbanging near the end, but this may be the whippiest ride in the entire state. Zero G-Roll and Corkscrew are especially fast and intense. 33. Valraven. This ride isn't the most intense coaster, and it has a very bad rattle over the midways of Cedar Point. But this ride has some great sensations. Hang time is everywhere throughout this coaster on each inversion. Also, the drops in airtime hill provide some good floater airtime, and you just can't go wrong with a drop on a dive coaster. 32. Lightning Racer, Lightning Side. I rode this Hershey Park Woody on the Lightning Side back in 2018, and I remember it being a blast. It had some great overbanks and airtime pops. While it was pretty rough, that added to the charm it had. Also, the dueling elements like the tunnel and helix are very fun. Interacting with the other side is just a blast. 31. Lightning Racer, Thunder Side. This is the side I rode in 2020. It's the exact same layout and sensations, but I found this one to be a bit smoother. These are interchangeable. 30. Gatekeeper. This Cedar Point wing coaster is, you guessed it, the keeper of the entrance gates. I love Gatekeeper as it is one of the smoothest coasters I've been on. It has some of the best hang time, whippy inversions, and of course, head choppers you can't find on any other coaster. It is just pure fun, as most wing coasters are. 29. Thunderbird, the last wing coaster on the list. Like the previous, Thunderbird at Holiday World is pure fun. I like it more than Gatekeeper just because of that launch at the beginning. It is a perfect way to kick off this intense and speedy coaster. The inversions are still hang time filled and there are still head choppers, but each element is more fun than Gatekeepers. 28. Afterburn. This Carowinds invert is the most intense ride in the park. While this isn't the smoothest coaster, the amount of G's and whippiness make up for it. Every element, especially the corkscrew and batwing, are smooth for the most part and very intense. 27. Legend. Yes, you heard that right. I am one of the few people that actually likes the Legend. This CCI is often hated on for apparently being rough. Well, I just don't see that. This is the most intense wooden coaster I've ridden at the moment. The reason for that is the crazy amount of laterals thrown into this long ride experience. The helix at the end almost has too many lateral G's. There are also many tunnels thrown into the layout to make the Legend even better than it already was. 26. Fahrenheit. This Hershey Park Intamin is a unique one. It has many inversions, each of them very whippy. This coaster has some great airtime pops, especially in the back, and overall this ride is very smooth. Each inversion is intense and whippy, which makes for this Intamin to be pure fun. And now we come to the top 25, which if you watched my top 25 video back in 2020, then you already know what to expect. But I am finally giving an explanation on my top 25 right now. 25. Talon. This invert was one of the most surprising coasters I rode back in 2020. This is my last credit at Dorney I needed, and I saved the best for last. Talon is pretty intense near the end, and is a very whippy ride. Also, this is probably the smoothest invert I've ridden, making it one of the best. 24. Dominator. This is my favorite floorless coaster I've ridden. Dominator is massive against the Kings of Dominion skyline, and every element is glossy, smooth, and intense. The Cobra Roll is whippy, along with the corkscrews. It has good airtime on the drops, and overall is just a pure fun coaster. 23. Copperhead Strike. This mock launch coaster at Carowinds is another pure fun coaster. It isn't the most intense coaster, but it has some of the best whippy transitions on any ride, and the lap bars make it a lot better. It has some airtime and some of the best hang time in the world. It might be the smoothest coaster at the park. It is overall a very well-rounded ride and is very fun. 22. Banshee. This Kings Island invert has a pretty bad rattle, but it has zero headbanging due to the restraints. In this layout is some very whippy drops and inversions. Also, there are some great positives in the loops and pretzel knot, and this ride has some great hang time at the end. Overall, Banshee is massive and a great invert. 21. The Beast. From a POV, this rough wooden coaster doesn't look too great, but the finale is one of the most intense elements on any coaster, which is full of laterals. Also, the Beast is over 4 minutes long, and it is still the longest wooden roller coaster in the world. It is a journey, and it doesn't even feel like you are at Kings Island anymore. The night ride turns the thrill up to 11, as the entire ride is faster and pitch black. It is a one-of-a-kind coaster. 20. Intimidator. You can never go wrong with a B&M Hyper, and Intimidator proves this fact. This Carowinds Hyper isn't the best. It has lots of trims, but it has some of the best floater airtime in the world. This ride has zero headbanging or rattle, and is just full of sustained floater hills that line the parking lot. It is such a fun coaster. 19. Raptor. This is my favorite inverted coaster. Raptor at Cedar Point may not be the smoothest, but it doesn't need to be. Raptor is the most intense invert I've ridden. Every element feels almost too fast. The transitions are very fast and whippy, and the back row makes every element feel faster and more intense. The finale makes your legs go numb due to the forces. Raptor is hated by many, but in my opinion, it is one of the best B&Ms in the world. 18. Orion. This B&M Giga coaster isn't my favorite Giga, but it is still a wonderful coaster. It has some great airtime pops and it keeps its speed well. It has some fast turns that are always fun and a helix that provides the positives. It is just a bit too short and lacking a bit of force for me to place it higher. But it is still a Giga coaster, so it is still a world-class ride. 17. Lightning Run. This coaster is the complete opposite of Orion in height. This small little ride at Kentucky Kingdom is one of the most intense coasters in the United States. Every element is fast, whippy, and airtime packed. Lightning Run may have the strongest airtime moments in the Midwest on its finale. I'm sure you're noticing a trend with my favorite coasters: intense, fast, and whippy. Lightning Run has all of these sensations. 16. Storm Runner. This intimate at Hershey Park is not talked about enough. The launch is almost too intense, and the entire layout is very fast. The inversions, especially the one-of-a-kind snake dive, are all whippy. The ride is over in seconds, but it provides an intense punch that makes it place in the top 20. 15. Diamondback. Yes, I like this Hyper better than Orion. Diamondback just has everything Orion has, but better. It has more airtime, each more sustained. While Diamondback has a very bad rattle compared to Orion, its airtime and overbanks more than make up for it. Also, you can never go wrong with a B&M Hyper. 14. Candemonium. Speaking of B&M Hypers, here comes the newest one. This Hershey Hyper, in my opinion, has the strongest airtime out of the bunch. Also, the helices are fast and provide some good positive Gs. And this ride may have the best head chopper on a coaster I've ridden. The outer bank turn that provides airtime feels like you will touch the support next to it. Candemonium is a very underrated Hyper. 13. Mystic Timbers. Mystic Timbers is basically Transitions, the ride. This Kings Island GCI is one of the fastest woodies I've ridden. Every turn provides some great whip and each hill provides wonderful airtime. This ride mixes airtime, laterals, and whip into one element, and it is so much fun. There is so much airtime on this ride that I have to place it higher than some of the best steel coasters. 12. Maverick. This intimate at my home park is the ride that started the new coaster war. The war of whippy transitions. This ride does whippy transitions very well. The entire ride has many turns that provides great laterals and, you guessed it, great whippiness. This ride also has 2 inversions, great ejector airtime, and a hidden launch tunnel. 11. Phantom's Revenge. The last Kennywood coaster is one of the best Hypers. It has some of the best ejector airtime near the end where riders are almost standing in their seats. It is also some of the strongest ejector I've ever felt. It is one of the biggest coasters in the state. Phantom uses the terrain to its advantage. There is just so much to love about this behemoth of a ride. 10. Millennium Force, the original Giga coaster at Cedar Point. I think that Millennium Force does a lot similar to Orion, but so much better. It is a longer coaster, and Millennium has stronger and more airtime, which is my favorite coaster sensation. Also, Millennium's overbanks have more laterals and speed than Orion's. Overall, Millennium is one speedy coaster and is pure fun. 9. Storm Chaser. Storm Chaser has the strongest airtime on any coaster in the Midwest. Storm Chaser has some of the whippiest RMC elements with its corkscrew and overbank turns. Also, every airtime hill is very fast and intense. Some of the airtime almost feels too strong. This ride is pretty short, but the layout packs such a big punch that it deserves this spot. 8. Intimidator 305. I don't think a ride can get more intense than this. Every element on this Giga coaster is as whippy as it possibly can get. Just look at these turns. The first turn was actually too intense, so the park had to add a trim brakes to the ride. This Giga also had some great airtime on the first drop and airtime hill. Overall, Intimidator the Real 5 is one of the best coasters in the state. And I say one of the best because 7. Twisted Timbers. This RMC is one of the longest and is located in the same park as the previous coaster. Twisted Timbers is also full of G-forces. Airtime is the ride's main focus, and Twisted Timbers has plenty of it. The airtime here is some of the strongest on any coaster. Sideways airtime, normal airtime, and upside down airtime are all here. This ride also has some whip and laterals like any other top tier coaster should. 6. Top Thrill Dragster. In my opinion, the launch of this ride is the most intense coaster element. The launch feels like it lasts forever and is one of the biggest gut punches. After this forceful launch comes a 400-foot tall hill full of airtime. Finally, the ride spins down a whippy spiral before going through a positive-filled valley into the brake run. Dragster has lots of force in just a 17-second ride. 5. Voyage. This is one of the longest coasters I've ridden. Every hill here provides some great floater airtime, as this ride used to hold the record for most negatives in one coaster. This is one of the most scenic coasters, and it has some great positives in every valley. It feels like the voyage goes on forever, and honestly, I never want it to end. It's smooth, intense, and airtime packed, and just pure fun. 4. Lightning Rod. This is one of the speediest coasters I've been on. This Dollywood RMC is as intense as a wooden coaster can get. After a launch lift, the ride enters a massive airtime-filled drop and wave turn. What comes next is lots of whippy banked turns, airtime hills, and of course the famous quad down, each hill providing stronger airtime than the previous. Lightning Rod is smooth, intense, and full of speed, placing it in my top 5. 3. Sky Rush, the last coaster in Pennsylvania, and in my opinion, the coaster with the strongest airtime in the world. Sky Rush at Hershey Park is claimed to be a very painful ride, but I don't see that. The restraints for me are pretty comfortable as long as you aren't stapled. The airtime here is phenomenal, as every hill is sustained and strong. There are lots of whippy transitions and speed in this fast-paced coaster. 2. Fury 325. This is the best Giga coaster. Fury 325 keeps its speed better than any other coaster on the list. Fury 325 has a ton of sustained floater airtime, and it even has a bit of sideways airtime. The overbanks provide incredible Gs, and overall, this ride is just pure fun. It is tall, fast, and full of forces. 1. Steel Vengeance. My favorite roller coaster is the one that has the most airtime in the world. Steel Vengeance has whippy elements like the wave turn, and it has some of the strongest and most sustained airtime in the world. With over 27 seconds, it has normal, sideways, and upside-down airtime. Also, it has some Gs littered around, lots of head choppers, and some of the biggest and fastest elements in the world. It deserves to be my number 1. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this monster of a video, consider subscribing and leave a like. Comment below what your favorite coasters are, and email me with questions or concerns. Have a great rest of your day.